Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander.
George, great to have you on the show. I think I've flubbed the opener for the last two episodes now. So
It
yeah, I don't
happens.
know what
It
that
happens
means.
to all of us, when we do our live stream, usually we honk it up real bad. No
Yeah.
problem. Thanks, Dan, for having me here, though. I
Yeah, of
appreciate it.
course. And we're not too far from each other. We're both in New York here. And before I threw on the recorder, we were kind of like edging our conversation towards the topic of today, which is IT, which, I think is one of those things that sounds boring, but is actually like more exciting than
Oh,
it
yeah.
seems at face value. So I definitely want to dig into that. But we were talking about technology and how much technological progress like the 20th century has seen, this idea of like the great stagnation and all that sort
Right.
of thing. And it's funny because like before entered this phone booth to do this episode, there was two dudes who I don't know behind me talking about ChatGPT, and we had an episode about ChatGPT that's out this week as I'm recording this, and all this sort of thing. And it's like on one hand, there's sort of this like extreme effect that we all do, where it's like either you dismiss it as nothing, or you say it's gonna take over your world and you're gonna
Right.
have like Skynet or something like that. And I'm just not really sure. I mean, at the end of like the way it's going now is like I think it's gonna either make people just go crazy or just abandon the internet and treat the internet as like a glorified Excel spreadsheet, use it just to do useful things, and then everything else becomes cheapened and fake. You
Right.
know,
You
I
never
think
know.
that's
I mean, everything become like you said earlier, laughing before. Like, are you really a deep fake or the real person on the other side of the recording, right, on the other side of the camera? And it's so true because as it becomes less and less human and the uncanny valley aspect of it kind of goes away, you really you'll start craving more the human interaction and that connection, I think. And so you'll kind of abandon this like kind of at least I hope so, because I feel just watching social media and having the benefit of growing up without it, being a little older, I feel that it's not always a blessing. It can be a very negative product, a very negative thing for a lot of people. So
yeah. And it's funny because I'm ambivalent. I think in a lot of ways, like I don't know that I would have started a business in an era before the internet. I think it would have been a
right.
lot harder, taken a lot more craziness and courage. But on the other hand, I'm like, maybe we've squeezed a lot of the juice from the orange at this point. Like we kind of know what it does. We can communicate with it. Like, and I'm asking this honestly, it's not rhetorical, but like, what's the value of just information exchange? At what point do you have to create something that you can touch or wrap your hands around, like a flying car, in order for there to be more value creation?
Absolutely. I mean, even the Chat GPT, if you step back and look at it, my view on it is very much a tool, like any other tool you're going to build. Like doing this work for a long time, you see every tool so that comes out is going to revolutionize the world, change everything. Everything's really different. Like, and just go back to your point about like either it's going to be this all or nothing, and usually like that's not the case. Like think of like cloud technology. Cloud technology is going to replace every possible aspect of our lives, and we're going to, nothing's going to be on premise or nothing's going to be touchable, tangible, and now, the reeling back of that is that most people are putting things back on premise, depending on what their setup is, because it's cost effective, it's faster, it's more secure. There's 100 reasons why. So I think ChatGPT will have that kind of apogee of going like too far, and then people kind of reel it back, and it'll be like any other tool we use in our toolbox. And I think it will help. I'm kind of eternal optimist, but if it could eliminate some of the more mundane tasks we deal with day in, day out, like sending recap emails after a meeting, if it could help with that, that's powerful. That's super useful, but that's time back where you can go back to doing strategic work or thinking and contemplating versus
Yeah.
as busy. It could be helpful for a code review. It has a lot of positives. This has a lot of negatives, though. I think it should be somewhat level of control, and I don't think you should ever give it control of things that are like physically damaging to other humans. Kind of I think in a deep little nerd stuff, like some Asimov robotic rules, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's funny because like I'm not super worried about that yet, only because we don't have technology that is going to create that. Because it's not there's all sorts of like nerdy rabbit holes I've gone down about
Oh yeah,
alignment, and there's the sort of thing, about what's going to happen there and the paperclip doomsday or something. And it's I don't know. I think there's really smart people that are scared of this, and then there's others really smart people that aren't. So it's
right.
kind of, and they're about half and half. If you look at like Steven Pinker versus like an Eliezer Yudkowsky or something.
Right. And yeah,
Yeah,
totally different mindsets, like totally way of approaching and attacking it.
Yeah, so I'm kind of in jury's out mode on that. I guess like, and I want to turn the conversation to you in a second because I think you've got a really unique perspective on this, but other just more kind of getting business done stuff. We can leave the AI conversation soon, but I think one of the biggest questions that I get is like, how is AI going to affect sales and how is it affecting sales and outreach and that kind of thing? And I'm still open-minded to it, but I think that one of the most important things in like a significant B2B sales situation is like trust and the
Yes.
provenance of a message and that sort of thing. And once you let enough AI do its own thing, you lose that, and then you have to monitor it. And if you have to monitor it closely enough, it kind of defeats the purpose of it because you're not getting time savings or leverage out of it anymore. So that's the main thing I'm seeing. But to turn this to you, can you talk about your background a little bit and how you built Valiant and so on?
Yeah, sure. So I'm one of the partners of Valiant Technology. We're what's called an MSP or managed service provider, kind of like a random term that the industry invented that means nothing to anybody, unfortunately. And what we do is the best way to describe us is our targets and verticals that we work in that we specialize in is small medium businesses under 150 people looking for to outsource considerable or all of their IT infrastructure and security to a trusted partner. And so, we'll do everything from your I can't print service desk request all the way to help you achieve a SOC 2 Type 2 security attestation or a designation or audit and everything in between that. And really how we have to position ourselves as a company is very much kind of the other part of your back office or trusted folks in your world, your attorney, accountant, HR team, IT. And when you're a small business, people spend a lot of time on IT, even though they don't think they do. I think at times it becomes as easy, like I'll just Google it and fix it. But it becomes a very, as you kind of unwind it, you spend a lot of time not working and not functioning. And we want to eliminate those kind of bumps in the road while we give them a sort of a guaranteed outcome so that we can say, hey, at some level, we're gonna say this is gonna work at this rate, at this price point, and really focus our energy on advertising, PR, marketing firms. That's my background. So I got into I got into IT totally accidentally. As we were talking before, I have a degree in history and German. I don't know how it's not. I guess it helps me be critical thinking skills as a studying history. That I think it does. Those liberal arts skills are important. Unfortunately, I read a really sad article saying that the number of people taking liberal arts as a major has dropped like almost to the point that some colleges don't even have departments anymore for liberal arts, which is really sad. I think that the people who are some of the best thinkers come to their place through a very circuitous route. You don't necessarily, some of the best computer programmers I know have a degree in philosophy or history or art or music. Actually, musicians make tremendously good programmers or technologists. In typical fashion, the business started in its own goofball way, like a couple guys think they can do something better than someone that was done before. I joined the firm about a year and a half into its existence. My background, I used to work for a large holding company ad agency, and so I got some really great experience. I started out in the service desk and ended up working for the holding company, sorts of special projects and kind of flitting around all over the place doing stuff that was pretty interesting when you're 25. And so it was great. And then, I ended up joining Valiant, and we've been in business 20 years. And we've been slowly building the business and building our client base and redirecting and changing things and kind of going back and forth. So, but it's definitely been a journey.
That's great. And that's a good perspective and kind of a varied perspective to start a business like that. And would you mind giving kind of an example of a typical, and it could be a real agency or anonymized or whatever, of how you're working with an agency? Like at what stage are they when they need IT and need what you do? And what does day one look like once you're doing your full suite of services?
That's a great question because we spend a lot of time on this as we think about this quite a bit. And, I kind of jokingly say where we do our best work, where we are the absolute most helpful for an agency is the day that the creative founders say, I'm going to hire a COO or I'm going to hire a CFO to manage and operate the business where I can do what I do really well, which is be a creative or be an account person, whatever that may be. And so what happens is we find that a lot of times the agency will hire a CFO, COO. They'll come in and go, holy smoke, what the heck is going on here? And a lot of processes, and there's no processes in place. the founder's running to the Apple store to buy a Mac himself and stuff like that. And they said they stood up a Google Workspace account, and that's that. And what happens is over time, that's great when you're in startup mode, when you're first fleshing out your business, you might get some new clients, but as you mature, you really do need to start putting it in place, much as if you were doing a financial, hey, we have a real financial reporting. We need to really understand what's happening on the business side. IT has a similar trajectory. So what we like to do at that point is we have to review the environment, what's going on there. Hey, how do you work? What do you use? And put together like a roadmap for them so that they can grow and scale, and have a dedicated plan for saying, okay, we win these accounts, we can grow. If we don't win these accounts, this is how we're going to manage that, and understand their spend, understand the applications. And I think the other really critical piece that I think gets overlooked quite a bit is many agencies are signing a lot of contracts. Every agency in the world gets a master service agreement, develop statements of work for their clients. If you're working with a big national brand, multinational, or Fortune 500, they're going to send you a complex contract, pages and pages and pages. And once again, I'm not an attorney, so I don't review those contracts as an attorney. But what we like to do is build the systems and processes and policies that align to best practices, so that you can, as an agency, say, hey, I can sign this with a level of comfort. Because if you read some of them, they're pretty harsh. They're asking for some pretty high level or very in-depth cybersecurity framework, policy, and privacy management. If you're collecting any kind of data, email addresses, PII or personal identifiable information, you really need to control and manage that. And you may be getting data at the pitch that is confidential to that business, maybe it's a new product or service the company's launching. So I think a lot of agencies are very fast and loose with this. A lot of clients we work with are recognizing this, and they're asking us to build programs with them and policies and procedures so that they can really, just with a level of comfort and confidence, go into the pitch. And when they get the MSA and the write-ups back, they can sign them and feel good about it. And especially if you're going head to head with a larger holding company, they have that in place. They have a CISO dedicated, or CISO, sorry, I use an acronym. It's a dangerous thing to do in the IT business. We tend to follow it. Chief Information Security Officer or Chief Security Officer. And so they have those programs and people in place. They have the tooling. They have all those things so they can sign it. They also have the insurance. Another thing we see is that a lot of small agencies don't have cyber liability insurance, which is another requirement we're seeing a lot of in our kind of review of the contracts. So I think kind of the value prop or a real thing is we want to offload some of these very burdensome components of the IT that could be a real hindrance for growth. We think that's kind of like our value to the customer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And let me think about the agency that's kind of on the cusp that might be listening to this. And they're like, yeah, whatever, I've got a Google Workspace. I can always just like upgrade that as I need to. Sure, I have to run out and buy a computer every 3 months, but it's not the end of the world. Like, what do you say to that agency? Like, what else are they not seeing?
So there's a lot to that. So
Yeah.
and you're right. We encountered this quite a bit when we talk to people.
Especially in a remote world, right? Because now so many people are
100%.
remote. Yeah.
So if you're taking cybersecurity seriously, the first and most important rule of cybersecurity, like the first thing that you learn when you're doing this, is you can't protect what you don't know. And I find that most small, medium businesses, if they're not cybersecurity minded or they don't have just the tools, they don't really know what they have. They may have, I bought a Mac here, I bought a Mac there. Jim, who's our chief, designer, downloaded a bunch of fonts. This guy has his own Creative Cloud license. This person they brought their own phone. And what happens is you really don't know where any of your data is. You don't know where your client's data is. And you can't actually say that I know where things are. So you need tools for that. You can't just out of the box do that, I think. And as you grow and scale, even if you don't grow and scale, but if you're signing contracts, you got to know what you got. That's, it's a kind of like it's an unfortunate reality, but you got to start there. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, if you look at your time as an owner or someone who is a creative, if you're spending time, and I'm telling you, I'm a business owner. I can tell you there's many a day I'm sitting there washing dishes in the sink in our office, like just messing around. That's not the best use of my time. And if your folks are spending time messing around with someone's issues and printers or, setting them up. It's just a time sink because you don't have the processes and tools to do that. Other thing that's important, I think that people really overlook is when people leave their agency. Agencies have a lot of turnover in that, just the nature of the business. People come and go. It's just how it is. We've seen it's a little better now with the way that freelancers are being managed in the kind of more modern era, but I think we still have a lot of as move changes. And one of the other pieces that are really kind of a danger point is if people leave the agency and we're not locking out in a systematic way their accounts. So you may have people have access to data for years after they work for the agency. And that's just a really dangerous place to operate from. Not to mention, and I can go on for hours on this. I don't want to belabor the point, but when I talk to business owners or leadership, I'm always like, the things that will ultimately cause you the most grief are pretty straightforward, but you need to manage them, right? You need to manage the systems that are in place. You need to manage people's identities and how they get into systems. And you need to manage people who are working for the agency or as third parties and what access they have. So those are really the kind of the top, if I had to say the top level three things to think about.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what a lot of this reminds me of is like if you, I have friends that have worked in the culinary industry here in New York and in other places. And if you talk to like chefs or cooks, they'll be as enthusiastic about cleaning products as they will food.
Oh yeah.
Right. And it's like a clean kitchen is a safe kitchen and that kind of thing. So it
Yeah.
ends up making everything else go well. And there's other examples of this. I think that there's a book I read called Obliquity where they're talking about the indirect path and all this stuff. And it was like the CEO of this big, I think it was like a tool manufacturer, focused just on worker safety, which is like an obscure issue out of like shareholder value and all these things. He's like, this is the only thing I care about is worker safety. And then, their shares went through the roof and everything else went better because people had to communicate better, all this sort of thing. So I'd love to get your take on that. Like, have you seen, I think when people think about IT, you're like, okay, this is like a boring thing I have to deal with. It's like buying insurance, it's overhead, it's playing defense, it's not really offense. Like, I'm not going to get excited about it. Are there positive surprises or opportunities you're seeing for your clients where they're like, yeah,
absolutely, 100%. I mean, we see it. We spend a lot of time on this. I'll let's go back to your restaurant and culinary thing. My background, when I was in college, I worked at Starbucks. I'd worked at a number of different restaurants. I love great experiences for customers. I think it's really critical. So I think bad IT goes to the bad employee experience. There's nothing worse. I can tell you, this is a pet peeve of mine. Like, and it's something that we try really hard to get ahead of. There's people a lot of process around this. There's nothing worse in my mind than you just left your job. You're starting a new job at a new place, wherever that may be. You sit down at your desk the first day, or wherever you may be, or maybe you're remote, so you're going to log on, or you got a laptop or something. It's not configured. You don't know your password. You can't print. You don't know where anything is, or you don't even have a computer. You don't have nothing, and you're just so now. The HR person may give you a call and be like, "Hey, yeah, so go on your personal computer, fill this out, and get to town," and then someone will reach out to you. I got to tell you, if that was me, and I've talked to people about this, they're like, I got really scared because is this the way this company operates? Is this their culture that they're spending a ton of money for me to come work here? Every employee hire has a real additional cost beyond the salary. That's significant when you start really looking at recruiting, training, just the time for them to get to speed, the onboarding itself. And every day that they don't have a working functional system is cost. So while we may be expensive per se on like a dollar value, you can't equate that to that employee non-productivity or that first start where they're not really working. Now, that's the initial impression. If you look at your company and you take everyone's, it's another exercise we like to do with customers. Take your fully loaded burden cost average for your company. Most people have that. If you haven't, it's a really good exercise to do. Take your whole company, smush it together, look at your benefits, that sort of thing. What's the hourly cost for downtime? So that's a defensive measure. But what's the hourly cost for people finding other ways to do things that are not protected by your system? So they're finding alternative methods. They're doing weird stuff. And then it gets accreted and it becomes I'm sure, Dan, you've worked in places where people said, well, that's how we've always done it.
Yeah, and I've seen it from people close to me that work in, well, to push, not to push back, but just kind of like to give an alternative to it.
Yep.
I know friends that work in for giant banks, right, that have
Oh
like
yeah.
the craziest compliance systems in the
Oh
world.
yeah, sure.
And they're the ones that use the alternative punk rock stuff the most, so they don't have to deal with it. And that
Yep.
seems sketchiest to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's a different thing. That's actually overreach, and
yeah,
that's a place where I think what happens is the compliance in IT is so far removed from like the means of production or the means of like how things get done. And to me, that's the ultimate failure on the IT or security team is that if people are going around the system you built, you have to find out why. And you have to work with leadership because it's in everyone's best interest to do it correctly. So sorry if I'm going to kind of go all
no,
over.
I think this is a really interesting point. Is how do you balance those two things, and to make it tangible, most
Sure.
agencies are going to be operating on a combination of like Google, maybe Asana or similar, ClickUp, a few other tools. Like how do you make it so everything is accessible and easy enough while dealing with security, which is the hardest question in the world. But anyway,
No, it's a great question.
yep,
It's a great question and very much something that I think about probably. I'm almost embarrassed at how many hours a day I spend thinking about it.
sure,
So let's say you're a 25 person agency, whatever specialization you might have, event or social. And so let's say easy example, the majority of users are Macs. They have a very heavy Google workspace environment. And we use Asana and Concur for reimbursement. Let's say that's a really simple but pretty common setup. Well, the first thing we like to do is start looking at making sure that the Macs are configured correctly. From there, we want to start linking together applications or logins and identity using like a SSO or SAML system. People don't know that's like a single sign-on. So when I log into one environment, it passes my credentials to other environments in a secure manner so that the end user or a person doesn't have to remember 17 different passwords. One of the biggest dangers that we see is people, not to get in a soapbox, but people use short passwords that reuse passwords, and also they don't protect things with multi-factor authentication. So if we can package it all together for them in a way that I log into my machine and then all my applications are available to me without having to re-log in every time I do everything or remember passwords, it can be a real time saver and easier for onboarding, offboarding new people. So I can rapidly get people up to speed versus having to do that. And when you do it that way, people tend to use less of the off-label things because now it's easier for them to get to where they need to go. If people don't know how to get to where they need to go, or they haven't been, and I'll talk about this as I'll put a pin in it, but I'll talk about training for a second. What happens is they will find alternative ways. And this will go back to training for a second. Training is probably one of the most underutilized, underdone things in any company by far. So I can't give you exact numbers, but most technology projects fail or don't meet the need of the business. This happens because there's a lot of expectations, there's a lot of what's going to happen. It doesn't really help. So what we found over the years was that if people are given training to use the product or the service or the system in a way that is clear, aligns to the need of the business, we get a lot higher rate of adoption than just. And I've worked in places that I've done it myself, where you're just like, here's your logons, have fun, and you expect people to figure it out on their own, and that doesn't work. It doesn't work for a lot of reasons. So what we think, what our kind of attack or approach to it, or the way we attack it, is to make it easy for people to get onto the system, so they're not futzing around with passwords and what's the URL and how do I do that, and also train them. If we want them to use it in a specific way, we train them to use it in a specific way. And some of it is not always in our purview. Like let's say it was a specialized media buy system, but we would want to work with that vendor to make sure that training and the setup was correct, that sort of thing, so that people have the right way to use it. So I think that's a really important piece.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit on the training side, because I think a lot of people listening are, agencies that do really complex work for their clients, and they are communicating to them what they're going to do. And then there's also, whether they call it training or not, there's a fair amount of communication with here's what's going to happen when, here's what we need from you, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera. And it's hard to get right because there's so much that has to be communicated, and usually you're one of many priorities that your clients are
Oh
dealing
yeah.
with, and all this sort of thing. So I'd love to learn how do you guys handle training when you're taking on an IT client? Are you using video? How often are you communicating?
Oh, sure.
What does your training program look like?
That's great. That's a great question. So when we start working with a new customer, we do a number of different trainings. I'll use that as I think as a really point example. So we built a very specialized training. So one of the things that we think is critical for our success in any agency or any company is that we have a strong primary contact, someone who's our sort of a champion, sort of the liaison between us and management, someone who can help get things done in the agency or at a company. And we do a very specialized training with them about all of our systems before as I was onboard them. And that could be, and it starts with, this is our invoicing, this is our ticketing system, this is how you request new users, this is how you report, this is how you create tickets, this is how you review tickets, this is the metrics that we're going to discuss. And we go in depth, and we update that very regularly with them, because we find that one of our failures in the past was that we get mad at people because we think, well, they should know this. We wrote a document. But you're like, well, you didn't really explain it. It doesn't make sense. Because if you just read it, you'd be like, well, what does that mean? So we spend a lot of time on with the primary contact. We also train the staff on how to utilize a service desk. I think a lot of folks don't understand how it works because they never worked. If you never worked on a service desk, why would you know how a service desk operates? People are like, man, I hate getting tickets. Well, tickets are your friends in some level. I'll tell you why. This is the history of what happened. It's recording. I think one of the problems, even myself, when I worked in a large agency, people come knock at your door and be like, hey, can you come fix this thing? You go do it. And then, 2 weeks later, it breaks again or something happens. And now you're starting up from square one. So tickets are important. But also we want people to be able to understand what's broken in the system or how to report it properly, how to take a screenshot, that sort of thing. So we train them on that. And when we put in place new systems, let's say they were using Google Workspace, but they weren't using it effectively. They were using a combination of personal and the company logins. They might have been not optimizing the calendar utilization. They didn't know how to use some of the more deep level functions in the mail client. We'll do a specialized training around that for them, and really get them up to speed as much as much or as little as they want to be, so that they get more out of the tool. We see it a lot with people who don't understand how to use cloud storage, because it's so much more useful than your kind of old school file server. You can share things, you have control of it, you know who read it, when and how. We have really in-depth logging. And what happens is people just still continue to send emails with attachments. And it doesn't make any sense. But it makes sense if no one showed you how to do that. So we spend a lot of effort on training on that. And especially if we implemented a new system or upgrade, we'll put it in place. And then if someone needs something really specialized, let's say around a product, we'll work with them to put together a specialized training for them. That's a little bit outside of our normal day-to-day, because there's so many different systems out there. But in terms of the fundamentals, we'll show staff how to use them.
Yeah, and to get into the weeds a little bit on it, what I've noticed is, back to the restaurant analogy, sometimes it's not just about the communication of information. It's like, am I getting a white linen tablecloth, or am I getting like a plastic fork and paper napkin kind of situation? And sometimes that's about timing. If it's a new client relationship, the linen tablecloth might be in order. If it's later on, then it's like, here's a Loom video of what to do. How do you guys handle that? What's the mediums you're using to train people?
Oh, sure. So we do a live train. We do a lot of live trainings using video like this, Zoom, Teams. I'll even do, depending on the client, we'll do in-person trainings, specifically around cybersecurity. One of the trainings we include in all of our service offering with any customer is an annual live cybersecurity training with the person who does that for a living. I'll do it, our CIO does it, our trainer does it, because we think that it's just such a critical thing to get people aware of it every year. And also, I'm not a big fan of checking boxes. I think checking boxes are not ideal, but it does check a box for and if you have insurance or any kind of requirements. But the thing is, we want people to be in the mindset. We also work with them we'll send them the YouTube how-tos. We'll create special YouTube how-tos for them, dedicated just for them. We'll also write up instruction sheets, like step-by-steps. We'll do screen capture reviews, like click here, do that, do this, that sort of thing, using like Snagit or one of those kind of tools, Camtasia. So, we kind of mix it up. And then finally, we also offer a pretty robust training catalog from a partner we were partnered with for like how to use basic applications, Excel, Word, Google
Yeah.
Sheets. So that we want people to get as much or as little as they want, but really we want everyone to understand, we want the basics to be out there for them. So what we haven't done is develop with customers mandatory trainings. Something people have asked us for. So that's something that's definitely on our roadmap is like, hey, we want, much like, I don't know, if you're in New York, you have to take a mandatory sexual harassment training. So, ideally we want to be able to prove that someone took a training. So that's something we're actually investigating.
Yeah, that makes sense. And another question I have is a lot of the times, again, people are thinking of this as overhead and as like something that's kind of defensive. One opportunity that I've sort of like come across with some of our prospects and clients is using compliance as a differentiator, right? If you're selling in financial healthcare, there's probably other verticals I'm thinking about making that front and center. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, do you have clients that have been able to do that and win more business from it, and how are they approaching that?
So a number of our clients we've worked with a number of clients. One client in particular, I'm thinking of, we helped them work through getting what's called a SOC 2 Type 2. That's an audit compliance, an external audit by the American Institute of CPAs. You usually see a lot for software or SaaS companies. We see it a lot on requirements. I wouldn't necessarily say that's the first place you should go, but it's something we can't help them with. What we found is that if we build the full policy set and the proof for the customer, that helps them. I'll give you for example, I work with a financial services PR firm or dedicated to financial services. And I could say that, not that we did everything, but they're really conscientious company, really smart folks. But we did a lot of work with them to build together a great program so that when they get audited by like BNY Mellon or Chase or JP Morgan, whoever it may be, they can at a high level discuss back and forth with them. So when it's like, I think it's a massive, it's a barrier to entry for smaller companies, because if you don't have that stuff in place, I don't even know how you would say yes or no to these things if you just want to do it. The other thing is, when you go to market, when you respond to RFPs, you can say, hey, this is what we do already. And you can send over your document set. So the one we like to utilize, because we find here in the States, it's the one that is broad and has a lot of power, is very useful because it maps, it's called NIST CSF, or Cybersecurity Framework. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We're just sort of like weights and measures and that sort of thing back in the old days, but they built some really great frameworks to operate your business against that scale from, your 25-person agency to, Lockheed Martin. So it really runs the gamut. And the thing is, the guidance doesn't necessarily change based on how large you are. It's more about that documentation control and process or improvement that matters. So I think it's a great way if you're pitching, especially regulated industries, and that could be, as it financial services, healthcare, if you're doing any kind of military or government work, you really need to have these things in place, because I don't think you can be, you might not even be able to be on a vendor list without them.
Right. That makes sense. And to the cybersecurity angle, I think that there's, nobody would disagree with you and everything, but there's still so many companies that are like, bankrolled by this like fear, uncertainty, and doubt involving cybersecurity. So I'd love to just talk about that a little bit. Like, can you tell any ghost stories? Like, what is the cybersecurity threat that if you're like, small mid-size agency, you're up against, and any stories you can tell about bad things that have happened?
I can tell you that what generally happens is, just speaking from experience, it can be really devastating in a way that you just don't expect. So this firm, they just were not ready for what happened. In a way, not to be fear and doubt guy, I don't like, FUD is a bad thing, right? You don't want to sell nor operate from the FUD perspective. But this firm in particular, they weren't an agency, but they're adjacent. They, attacker got in through a VPN. They still had some on-premise systems, got into VPN, and utterly wiped out everything in the environment. And when I mean they encrypted everything, both the systems, backups. Luckily, they had enough clouds, some things in the cloud that they were still able to operate and recover from it. But it took about 90 days to get things back to sort of where they were. And they had insurance. So a lot of it was covered under that insurance. We've worked with people who have not had insurance. You're out of pocket for about $100 to $200,000 to recover from a cyber incident, depending on the size of the company, depending what happens. Now, that being said, mostly the cost is not in that direct hard cost, but inattention to your business, to your focus on trying to recover, dealing with internal and external clients, reporting it. And so not to be fearful, but I think it can be a massive distraction and a massive business interrupter. One person I've worked with, she's a really smart lady in the insurance industry. Her thesis and her idea is that we want to make cyber incidents. If you think about cyber incident as a car crash, one car crash is 100 miles an hour into a bridge abutment and the car bursts into flames, which is the far end of it, where nothing works and you're dead in the water. Some foreign national hacker team just released all your data for your customers on the dark web. Now you're in a world of pain. To making it more like, yeah, I got rear-ended on 495 going out to Long Island on a Saturday or Friday night, where it's like, it is inconvenient, this sucks, but it's manageable. And I think that is the kind of the goal where we want to be with our customers, to be like, there's a lot of sayings. It's like cybersecurity is like riding a motorcycle. It's not if you crash, it's when you crash. It's not if you're going to have an incident, it's when you have an incident. It's more about managing the risk so that when there is an incident, it's managed and it's controlled and it's not devastating. So that's a really important distinction. I think that is their preparation. If I had to say to any customers or anyone listening, it's not about the fear, it's about managing the risk in your environment so that you can be ready for something happening. Think of cyber risk in the same category as financial risk, HR risk, legal risk. Put it in the same bucket. It's in the same, if you're an executive, you're a team leader, you're your owner, put it in that same bucket. You wouldn't go around screaming, yelling at people and calling them names in the same way that, you wouldn't do that, because that's just bad business. Not protecting your data and your customers and your internal client, your people's data is the same thing in my mind. It's managing that risk.
Yeah. As a follow-up question, what did the hacker want? Like, what was there an ask, or did they just steal the data?
Bitcoin, baby. They just want it's all. Yeah. I think the statistic I saw on Verizon's data breach report was like 95 or 98% of attacks are financially motivated. And this is a step back for that. The attacks are not the attacks of the past. I've been doing IT a long time, and it used to be like kind of like this like a wild script kiddie kind of, it got out of control, some guy in his basement. These are not accidental attacks. These are super well coordinated professional attackers. Their job is to look for soft targets and attack them. And your goal as a company or the leadership team is to make your target hard enough that it's not worth it. Unfortunately, there's still so many soft targets out there that people could just attack at will. We want to get people to have that stop happening by having this better cyber hygiene, better backups, better procedures and policies and training. So,
yeah. And have you had clients try to negotiate with hackers and come out differently? How's that played out?
Man, it goes bad. So if you have insurance, it's actually really interesting. Is people don't know this. If you have insurance, cyber insurance, they will get you a negotiator, someone that does this before. It's like part of a whole kind of industry. Usually the attackers, they're looking for maximum dollar for the least amount of work. It's a ransom, and they don't really care if you get your data back or not. Some of them do. There's like some anecdotal reports. These people tell, hey, next time you should put multi-factor on or some BS like that. But they're looking for the fast buck as fast as possible. A lot of the guidance, if you look at a law enforcement, FBI, CISA, CISA is a cybersecurity agency of the federal government. They really don't want you paying the ransom. The ransom, it's like piracy, right? The more people pay the pirate, the more people are going to do it. So we shouldn't pay the ransom. That being said, sometimes you have to. And if you do, I would highly, highly recommend hiring a cyber attorney, someone who deals with this day in, day out, and a professional negotiator. The saying about the attorney who represents himself and his own court case as a fool for a client, you don't negotiate your own ransom. it's a really dangerous place to operate and get professional people to do it. It's critical. And if you don't have, and if I could give one thing for everyone, if you don't have cyber liability insurance, look into it. Depending on what kind of work you do, it can be a not super expensive line item into your day-to-day. A lot of agency customers will require it now, from what I see, this doing MSAs, and it could save your business. You don't want to depend on it. It's like it's literally your last backstop. But if you need it, you want to have it. You can't have it after that. You can't buy insurance on the house after it burned down. So this is important.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah. No, that makes sense. I think this has become a much more exciting interview than the first glance when people hear the word IT. So I think
Yeah,
this
I
is
mean, I just to go, history of IT in some ways. IT was always kind of an oddball business function, right? It kind of grew out of like this weird technology, and business didn't really know where it fits. But my belief is that our job is to truly help executives and business owners grow their business, right? Using the technology, being safe, applying risk management principles, and allowing them not making bad mistakes or bad errors that could really impact the business down the road. Much like your attorney, much like your accountant. And if you treat it that way, I think the rewards are pretty high beyond the defensive. This go back to your earlier comment, because now it's part of an integrated program for everything you touch and do. So it's not just like this willy-nilly thing where we're just kind of, hey, by the way, I'll laugh at my own business. We stopped doing this. I used to go to trade shows and see things on the internet and be like, hey, I bought this. We're going to roll this out to all of our customers. And my staff was like, you're out of your mind. Why do we do this?
Yeah.
So we built like an evaluation framework for tooling and systems. So it goes across multiple functions and multiple people in the organization so that we don't have that blind spot. And
sorry to cut you off. I was just going to say that's a really interesting way to think about IT. It's also like a shiny object defense system, right? Because it's like, all right, if you want to take on some random tool and you think this tool is going to transform everything, you better put in the work to integrate it, right? So I like that. That's interesting.
Another warning to everyone. I have lots of warnings. I can go for hours, but don't get swayed or fall into the shiny object tool. The ones that I find people get really excited about because they are transformational when applied correctly. It's like a PeopleSoft or a Salesforce. These big shiny CRM tools that are going to make your business 100% better. They can, but man, you really got to put a lot of energy, effort, time, thought, transformational adoption rates. There's so much to it. And I work in sales, and you work in sales. We work in sales. We want people, but you're doing a disservice to someone if you're not understanding what those systems entail to implement properly and how they work. Because one of the things I see a lot is people spend a ton of money on applications they don't use. And it's also a massive exposure for the business because there may be data in there that should be confidential or should not be there, but it gets unlaced fallow months or years, and it's just dangerous. So anyway, all right, I know we're almost out of time. I can keep going.
No, that's great, George. I think that's a good note to end on. And how can people follow what you're up to and get in touch and everything?
If you want to check us out, our website's thevaliantway.com, TheValiant way, the right word. You can definitely send it to you. Also, check us out on LinkedIn. We do quite a bit of posting there. And we have a great YouTube channel with lots of content on it. If you look up The Valiant Way on YouTube, you'll find us there. So
awesome. We'll get all that linked up and we'll be live for you soon. So George, really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.